She's the family failure, Dad announced at the wedding. What they didn't know, I owned the historic Cliffside Theater hosting their perfect celebration. My name's Camilla Harding, and I'm 31 years old. The first thing you notice about the Mariner's Crown is the sound, the deep, rhythmic crash of the North Pacific against the cliffs just beyond the tall, salt-stained windows. It's a sound that gets into your bones, a constant reminder of how small you are against something so vast. The second thing you notice is the velvet. I chose a deep sea green for the seat backs, a color that seems to drink the light and hold on to secrets. Tonight, though, I'm just a guest here, one of 300 people milling about in the grand lobby. I'm wearing a simple ink blue dress, trying my best to look like I don't own every inch of the place, from the polished brass railings to the hand-blown glass fixtures overhead. My goal for the evening was simple: get through my brother Lucas's wedding without a single incident. Just smile, sip my champagne, and fade into the background. My primary obstacle was holding court by the raw bar, laughing so loud it made the crystal glasses tremble. My father, Victor Harding, mayoral candidate and the town's unofficial gatekeeper, was in his element. His laughter didn't just fill the space, it occupied it, demanding attention. I watched as he snapped his fingers at a server, a young woman I'd hired just 2 weeks ago for her quiet competence. He leaned in, his voice a low grumble I couldn't hear but could feel across the room, and complained that the Albarino wasn't cold enough. He didn't know, of course, that the wine cellar's state-of-the-art cooling system reported its temperature to an app on my phone. I glanced down. It was exactly 45 degrees. He caught my eye from across the room, and his gaze slid over me, dismissing my simple dress, my posture, my very presence, before he gave a curt, impatient gesture for me to come over. The confrontation I'd been hoping to avoid all night was starting before the first toast. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of salt and expensive perfume, and made my way across the marble floor. The sound of the gulls crying outside momentarily drowned out the elegant notes of the string quartet. "There you are," my mom said, appearing at my dad's side as if from nowhere. She ran a critical eye down the length of my dress, her lips tightening into a familiar line of disapproval. "So simple, Camilla. Did you even try?" She patted my arm, a gesture that was supposed to look like affection, but felt like a correction. "It's just Sarah's dress is a masterpiece. It's important to show support, to look the part." Sarah was my brother's bride, a woman I genuinely liked. My tactic was to just smile, nod, and let the comments slide off me. It was a skill I'd perfected over 2 decades of family gatherings, a kind of emotional armor. "It's a beautiful party, Mom," I said, my voice neutral. My brother Lucas found me a few minutes later. His face lit up with a genuine joy that made my chest ache. "Cammy, you made it. The place looks incredible, doesn't it?" He squeezed my arm, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and the soft glow of the lights I had spent weeks programming. For a second, it was just us, the way it used to be when we were kids, sharing secrets in the back of our parents' car. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to see the look on his face when I said, "This place, Lucas, it's all mine. I built this for you." But before I could get a single word out, my dad clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder, steering him away. "Lucas, Councilman Miller is here. Let's not keep him waiting." Lucas gave me a quick, apologetic look over his shoulder and was gone, swallowed back into my father's orbit. The moment was lost. I was left standing alone by a tray of oysters, watching my brother get absorbed back into the world I'd run away from. My attempt to blend in had failed. I wasn't blending in. I was being erased all over again. It was painfully clear that staying silent wasn't going to be the shield I'd hoped for. I managed to find Sarah near the grand staircase, a vision in lace and silk. She hugged me tightly, a real hug, warm and sincere. "Thank you for coming, Camilla. It means the world to Lucas." She looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. "This place is a dream. Lucas told me you two used to sneak in here as kids when it was all boarded up." I smiled, a real smile this time. "We did. We always said it looked like a sunken castle." It felt good to connect with her, like finding a small island of calm in the middle of a churning sea. For that brief moment, I felt like family, like I actually belonged here. Then, my mother materialized beside us, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. "Isn't she sweet?" Mom said to Sarah, gesturing toward me as if I were a child. She turned to me, her voice dropping, the smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Sarah was just saying how wonderful it is that you came all this way for your brother." Then, she leaned in, her voice a cold whisper meant only for me. "You're good at showing up. It's the follow-through you've never mastered." The warmth I'd felt moments before vanished, replaced by a familiar, chilling sting. My progress, my success, my entire life outside this town was an illusion. In my family's eyes, I was, and would always be, a disappointment who couldn't finish what she started. I needed some air, some distance. I slipped away to the mezzanine that overlooked the main floor, a vantage point I designed for exactly this purpose, to see the whole operation at once. The event was running smoothly. My event. The string quartet played flawlessly, the servers moved like ghosts, and the guests laughed, blissfully unaware of the tension coiling inside me. My theater manager, Grace Holloway, found me checking the sound levels on my tablet. She was a calm, capable woman in her 50s, who knew more about running a venue than anyone I'd ever met. She kept her voice low, her expression carefully neutral. "Just a heads up. Mr. Harding has been in the kitchen." My stomach sank. "He told the head chef the oysters were unacceptable, and that he'd be speaking to the owner about it first thing Monday morning." I looked down at my father, who was now glad-handing a reporter from the local paper, putting on a grand performance of the benevolent patriarch. This wasn't just about him belittling me anymore. He was harassing my staff, the people I had handpicked and trained. He was threatening my business. The carefully constructed wall between guest Camilla and owner Camilla was beginning to crack, and I could see the stress fractures spreading. This was my stage, my crew, my reputation on the line. The stakes were no longer just about surviving the night. They were about defending the life I had painstakingly built in secret. From the mezzanine, I saw him. My dad had cornered my stage manager, a 22-year-old named Alex, who I'd personally hired for his preternatural calm under pressure. My father was jabbing a finger in Alex's chest, his face flushed with anger, his voice a low growl I could feel vibrating through the floorboards, even from a distance. The issue, I learned later, was a lighting filter, a tiny, insignificant detail about the hue of a single spotlight that no one else in the room would ever notice. I saw Alex's shoulders slump. I saw the fear in his eyes as he tried to respond to this powerful, intimidating man. That's when something inside me snapped. I moved. I walked down the curved marble staircase, my heels clicking with a sharp, deliberate rhythm. Every head in the vicinity turned. The air grew still around us. "Dad," I said, my voice perfectly even, cutting through his tirade. Alex reports to Owen, the technical director. "If you have an issue with the lighting, you can take it up with him after the ceremony." I physically put myself between them, a small woman in an ink blue dress standing up to the biggest man in the room. "But right now, your only job is to be the father of the groom." He stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. He was furious at being challenged, especially by me, especially in public. The bridge of staying quiet and invisible wasn't just burned, it was vaporized. "You don't talk to me like that," he hissed, his voice dangerously low, a threat simmering just beneath the surface. "Not here, not ever." I didn't flinch. I held his gaze for a long moment, letting the silence hang between us. "Enjoy the party," I said, then turned my back on him and gently guided Alex back toward the control booth at the rear of the theater. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. The ticking clock suddenly felt deafening. My father was now angry, embarrassed, and looking for a way to regain control. I knew him. I knew exactly what he would do. He would use his speech, his toast, to put me back in my place. I found my technical director, Owen Blake, a quiet genius with a ponytail and a deep love for theatrical tech, in the booth. "Owen," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Change of plans. I need you to be ready." I pulled out my phone and messaged him a link to a private, encrypted cloud folder I had prepared weeks ago as a worst-case scenario. "Cue these up. Wait for my signal. You'll know it when you see it." The folder contained everything. The bank statements showing where the $72,000 from my trust really went. The itemized, paid-in-full invoices for the wedding. And the deed to the Mariner's Crown, with my name on it in clear, black ink. I was no longer just a guest. I was a producer, and I was about to produce a show my father would never, ever forget. The orchestra finished its prelude, the final notes hanging in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. The guests took their seats, the sea-green velvet swallowing the rustle of their fine clothes. The air was thick with anticipation for the bride and groom. But my stomach was a cold, hard knot. My dad walked to the microphone at the side of the stage. An unscheduled toast. Of course. He tapped the mic, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. He started by praising Lucas, calling him a son who understood responsibility and legacy, his voice booming with false sincerity. Then, his gaze found me where I sat in the second row, and a small, cruel smile touched his lips. "Of course, not all children understand the value of hard work," he said into the mic, his voice wrapping around the room I had rebuilt from ruin. "Some, when given every advantage, every opportunity, simply squander it." The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpets. "We love her," he continued, making a magnanimous gesture to the crowd as if he were granting me a great pardon. "But my daughter Camilla never could handle serious work." It was the lie he'd told for a decade, the story that had followed me out of this town, now amplified for 300 people to hear. The story of me as the family failure, the cautionary tale, delivered on my own stage, using a sound system I paid for. In that moment, any last, lingering thought I had, of keeping the peace, of protecting the fragile idea of our family, died. I knew this would break things, perhaps irrevocably. It might shatter my relationship with Lucas forever. It would absolutely create a public scandal that would ripple through his mayoral campaign. I accepted it. I looked up to the control booth high above and gave Owen the signal. A single, sharp nod. My goal was no longer to survive the day. It was to take back the story. My father walked off the stage to scattered, uncertain applause. He thought he'd had the last word, that he'd successfully reasserted his power. He strode past my table on his way back to the front row, pausing to lean in close. "That's how it's done," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey and self-satisfaction. A lesson in public speaking. He wasn't just content with the public humiliation. He had to rub it in privately to make sure I understood my place. He was retaliating for my earlier defense of the stage manager, reestablishing his dominance in the most public way possible, right before his son's wedding vows. He believed he was untouchable, that his narrative was the only one that mattered, the only one that would ever be heard. He saw my silence not as shock, but as submission, the same quiet submission he'd demanded from me my entire life. His arrogance was the final push I needed. He wasn't just wrong, he was overconfident, and he was standing on a stage that answered ultimately to me. I searched the crowd for my brother. I needed to see his face, to find some flicker of support, some sign that he knew this was wrong. I caught his eye across the room. He was standing with Sarah, his expression a miserable, agonizing conflict of guilt and helplessness. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second, and then he looked away. He wasn't going to stand up for me. Not against our father. He never had. In that single, heartbreaking moment, I lost the last shred of hope I had of finding an ally within my own family. I was completely on my own. The guests were whispering now, shooting furtive glances in my direction. Some looks were filled with pity, others with a kind of morbid curiosity. The label he'd just given me, failure, was sticking. I could feel it hardening around me like cement. The efficient, a pleasant-looking woman in a cream-colored dress was walking toward the center of the stage. The music was about to start. The constraint was absolute. I had seconds to act, or the moment would be gone forever, the lie cemented as permanent truth. My isolation was total, but it was also clarifying. There was no one left to disappoint, no one left to persuade. There was only the truth, waiting in the wings for its cue. As the officiant took her place and smiled out at the expectant faces, my mother slid into the chair next to me. She didn't reach for my hand. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. She leaned close, her cloud of expensive perfume, cloying and suffocating. "For God's sake, Camilla, fix your face," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You're making people uncomfortable." I stared at her, utterly speechless. The cruelty of it stole my breath. "Your father is emotional," she continued, her words sharp and quick. "You know how he gets. Why do you always have to provoke him? Just smile and let him have his moment. It's Lucas's day." It wasn't a plea for peace. It was an order to absorb the abuse, to manage my father's emotions for him, to prioritize the family's public image above my own dignity. And that was the second, more painful reveal of the night. My mother wasn't a silent victim of my father's tyranny. She was his co-conspirator. She was the one who smoothed things over, who managed the fallout, who had spent my entire childhood telling me to be quieter, smaller, less difficult. The real threat wasn't just my father's rage, it was my mother's complicity. Any fantasy I'd ever entertained of pulling my mom aside later, of explaining things to her in the quiet light of day, of appealing to her as a mother, it all dissolved into nothing. She was not on my side. She was the architect of the system that kept me in my place. The last safe option, a private family reckoning, was officially off the table. It would have been my word against their united front, and I would have lost, just like I always had. The soft opening notes of the wedding march began to play from the speakers. The ticking clock was no longer a metaphor. It was the melody signaling the end of my opportunity. I was completely and utterly cornered, with no way out and no one to turn to. There was no path forward but the one I had just created, the one I had loaded into that cloud folder. No one was coming to rescue me. I looked toward the control booth, high above the stage, a dark square of glass against the ornate plasterwork. I saw a flicker of light, a small acknowledgement from Owen. He was ready. It was time. The show was about to begin. The music swelled, the familiar tune filling the theater. The officiant smiled warmly at the guests. It was happening, and for one terrible, gut-wrenching second, I thought I had hesitated too long. I thought maybe Owen hadn't gotten the signal, or that the tech had failed, or that I had simply lost my nerve. My father was beaming from the front row, looking every inch the proud patriarch. He had won. He had publicly shamed me, and was now about to watch his perfect son get married in a lavish celebration of the family from which I was functionally exiled. The core wound of my childhood, of speaking up and being told I was wrong, of being ignored, of having my truth systematically erased, gaped wide open, raw and painful. I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. My brother was a stranger to me, my mother my warden, and my father my sworn enemy. The 300 guests weren't friends and family, they were just witnesses to my final, definitive humiliation. This was it. This was the moment that would define me forever. The failed daughter, the family ghost at the feast. But then, as the music swelled, I remembered something else. I remembered the feel of the rough blueprints in my hands, the sharp, clean smell of sawdust during the months of renovation, the solid, reassuring weight of the master keys when Grace first handed them to me. This place was real. The work I did was real. One fragile, earned possibility remained. My team, my stage, my truth. I held my breath and waited for the light. The wedding march didn't just stop. It was cut, abruptly, mid-note. The house lights dimmed, plunging the grand theater into a deep, expectant twilight. The velvet seats seemed to absorb the sound, creating a perfect, heavy silence that felt more profound than any noise. A single sharp spotlight didn't hit the bride at the back of the aisle. It hit the massive, blank projection wall behind the stage. Then, the theater's sound system, the one I spent a month tuning by hand to achieve perfect clarity, crackled to life. It wasn't my voice, not at first. It was my father's. An audio clip, clean and undeniable, filled the room. It was his voice from that afternoon, belittling a server. "Do you have any idea who I am? People like you don't last long in this town." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw my father freeze in his seat, his proud smile collapsing into a mask of confusion and rage. The screen behind him lit up. No fancy graphics, just clean, simple, black and white text. The first slide was an invoice from a company called Seaglass Holdings to Lucas and Sarah Harding. For venue rental, Mariner's Crown. The amount due was $0. And at the bottom, in bold letters, paid in full. The slides continued their silent, damning procession. Catering from the finest restaurant in the county, $74,000. A state-of-the-art lighting and sound package, $96,000. Flowers flown in from 3 countries, $38,000. The slides kept coming, listing decor and staff costs, adding up to a staggering total cost of $312,000. Each one was marked as a gift from Seaglass Holdings. Then, the slide changed to a bank statement from 10 years ago. A $72,000 withdrawal from my trust fund, with a handwritten note in the margin, collateral for versus Harding. And finally, the last slide appeared. A high-resolution scanned copy of the city deed for the property at 1 Cliffside Drive. The deed for the Mariner's Crown Theater. Owner, Camilla Harding. The microphone at the lectern glowed softly in the dim light. I stood up and walked to it, my steps steady. "I'm Camilla Harding," I said, my voice perfectly amplified, calm and clear. "And I am the owner of this theater." I let that sink in. I paid for every detail of this wedding, so my brother could have the day he and Sarah dreamed of. I did it quietly because, in my family, you have to do more than just speak to be heard. I looked at my brother, whose face was pale with shock. "Lucas, Sarah, this day is for you. Please, continue." Then I turned to the head of my security team, Marcus Hale, a tall, unflappable man who was waiting by the main doors. "Marcus, please escort my parents to the lobby. and ensure no one harasses the staff again tonight. My father started to bluster, shouting something about shutting this place down. My mother just wept, her shoulders shaking. But it was too late. The donors, the reporters, his campaign supporters, they had all seen the receipts. The truth was finally lit by my own stage lights. The wedding, amazingly, continued. The band started playing again, a little hesitantly at first, then with a renewed, almost defiant resolve. I went to the bar and quietly authorized a late-night dessert bar and 3 more cases of vintage champagne on the house. The staff moved with a new lightness, a visible relief in their posture. The air felt cleaner, easier to breathe, but the cost was real. I could hear my mother's quiet sobbing from the lobby, my father's impotent threats to a security guard who worked for me. I could feel the chasm that had opened between me and Lucas, wide and possibly uncrossable. Later, long after the cake was cut, he found me in the owner's suite, the private apartment I'd built overlooking the water. The wide windows framed the moonlit ocean. "Why, Cammy?" he asked, his voice hollow and lost. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I looked out at the dark waves crashing below. "I tried to," I answered, thinking of all the phone calls cut short, all the conversations steered back to his life, his problems. No one was listening. After everyone had left, I walked the empty theater, the salt air drifting through the open doors, clearing out the last of the perfume and champagne. I ran my hand over the sea-green velvet seats I'd chosen, the texture familiar and comforting. In the beginning of the night, I had been an anonymous guest, tense and afraid. Now I was the owner, alone in the quiet. Before I left, I found Grace and gave her the check for the $25,000 scholarship in our grandmother's name for local students studying hospitality, a way to build something new from the wreckage. I stepped outside. The neon crown of the theater sign cast a soft blue glow on the damp pavement. The sound of the surf wasn't a backdrop to my anxiety anymore. It was just the sea, and it sounded like freedom. That was the day I finally took control of my own story. If you've ever had to fight to make your voice heard, share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about getting the last word.